Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners, and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Today's guest is one of Australia's most successful and purpose-driven entrepreneurs, Radek Sali. As the former CEO of Swisse Wellness, he transformed the company from a $13 million business into a $650 million global powerhouse, culminating in a $2.1 billion sale. He went on to found Light Warrior, a certified B Corp investment group dedicated to building businesses that do good and deliver strong commercial outcomes. He's also the author of the award-winning book, How to Build a Billion-Dollar Business, where he shares his philosophy on blending purpose, profit, and passion to achieve extraordinary success. Radek, welcome to the podcast.
Intro, thank you so much.
It's easy when you've got a lot of boxes ticked in life, so there's a wide range of things to select from. So what an interesting journey you've endured. Perhaps we could start off and you could just tell us a little bit, the Cliff's Notes perhaps, of your journey and how you come to find us today.
Yeah, I suppose I've always felt a connection to being an entrepreneur from a young age. An entrepreneur is in kind of being creative and rethinking the way things were done. And I grew up with a father who's a professor of surgery, a mother who's a medical scientist. My father was one of the first people to talk about diet causing disease in conventional medical circles. And so he was laughed at when he had mentioned this thing, diet, and how it might be the cause of chronic disease, and talked to stress and how meditation might help with chronic conditions and supporting people through those journeys, but also in preventing chronic disease through stress. And so that took 20 years for his work to get published. So he started talking that way in the 70s. I was born in the 70s, so I grew up with a frustrated lecturer who would come home and tell me about his frustrations and how the system weren't accepting what he was suggesting and hypothesizing and ultimately proved. And then his work was published 20 years later, and that was through my formative years. And my mother would read blood of my father's patients to make sure that the nutrition they had held them in the best stead to dealing with whatever Western treatments and combining them with other philosophies to get the best possible outcome, to make sure the patient was as healthy as they could to deal with the stresses of conventional medical treatments. And the combination of the two are proving to be the way that everything is heading towards. With the father pretty frustrated with that system, I was pretty intent on reinventing the system. I did my apprenticeship at a place called Village Roadshow. I'm very fortunate that they were based out of Melbourne, and a brand that was global, making movies internationally and locally, but also in cinemas. And these cinemas were great big mini businesses in themselves with lots of different facets to their operations that you'd have to get your head across. So it ended up being the most wonderful apprenticeship, where you're exposed to the decision makers of the brand and the experience locally here. And it grew and kind of created what was my next opportunity, which was Swisse, which just made a whole lot of sense to come home and bring to bear all of that knowledge that my father had shared with me, industry that was around business, and then looking to reinvent it and reinforce the importance of nutrition in people's journey, on their health journey, I should say. So it was great to do Swisse, and then to come out of that and be in one piece, and now be in the fortunate position where I can really think about what I want to do next with intent, and also take what I've learned from what made us very successful at Swisse, which is a focus on culture, and then look at how we can support businesses to grow on the basis of creating an amazing workplace, and then also finding their purpose and doing more of that in a time where our version of democracy and capitalism is under threat. And I see that, really we should be focusing on our circles of influence, and the best thing that we can do is create the most inspiring workplaces as business leaders to maintain this wonderful system that we have here in Australia. Because if people are happy in most of their waking hours, which is where we spend our time, in working hours, they're going to be happier at home. And if people are happier at home, we're going to have a happier society and a better society. So that's kind of my tilt as to how I've got to where I am now.
What a wonderful response. Thank you. And I would have to say, generally, broadly agree with everything from many of the things around health. They seem to be quite common and standard today, but obviously groundbreaking at the time from your father. Now, I'd like to spin on to Swisse. You joined Swisse. It's a $13 million revenue company. Very, very different from when you left. Maybe tell us about what it was like when you started, and then perhaps you can consider or share with us something that happened along the way which seemed a bit maybe out of context or uncomfortable at the time, a big risk or something like that. Something that happened along the way that ended up paying off.
Yeah, sure. So I joined Swisse where at a time that it had grown rapidly to getting to that kind of 10 million in turnover. And it was driven by two founders who were incredible human beings that were focused on culture. And so that part, from a values point of view, we were aligned. The part that the organisation was struggling with, it had got to a point where the founder needed to be across every decision made, and it was just simply too much for one person that had driven that business from a very young age, 16-year-old in the tablet press room, and creating into what it was beginning to become. And so the basis and the foundation from my point of view, and now when I look back on every business we kind of invest in this space, these are the hardest, most formative times and the really important part of creating a foundation. And what I walked into was this foundation of culture and alignment, but also a brand, a product that was extraordinary, a brand that was set to think globally rather than just locally. And so those were really important facets that enabled me to come in and go, okay, well, I've been at Village Roadshow, global business worth $1 billion. And I'd been fortunate enough to work internationally as well with them in new territories and setting up cinema businesses from scratch in countries where multiplexes didn't exist. And so what I learned was taking system and process and enabling that system and process to empower people to make decisions. What I picked up on as well is that, I did learn from some of the leaders in my lifetime there. We had a lot of great leaders, but also some poor leaders. And I learnt most from the poor leaders in what not to do. And I had one CEO who would fire people by saying zap, or we'd say, if you want loyalty, get a dog, Radek. And then I asked him to talk to our cinema managers and inspire them over Christmas to our busiest time that we're behind them and we're supportive of them. And he got up and he said to the 60 or 70 managers we had from across the country, for those of you having a break over Christmas, enjoy your time with the family. And for those of you that aren't, bad luck. So what not to do. And I could see front line as to how big a difference that made, the way people spoke to people, the language that was used. And thankfully, this alignment of culture and what was important to me next was exactly what Swisse was about. A focus on ensuring that decisions were made with values front of mind. The challenge was, as I say, this founder-driven model where the founder needed to be across every decision. It needed big company structure, process, and empowerment, and then also a way of taking the values that the essence that were reinforced by that founder, bringing them to life throughout the organisation. So simplifying the values so they were memorable. They were 10 commandments or 10 position points initially. We just took the best parts of the language of those 10 value statements. And the most clicky part or most memorable part was the 4 Ps, people, principles and passion, coming for profit. And so we shaped our value structure around those acronyms and behavior points, and then we would interlace that into the business plan. And so then that helped us make decisions that were values driven and enabled the founder to feel like that they didn't have to be in every conversation and decision making outcome. And then the other part of that is we and this is the brave decision that we needed to make, is that a lot of our team that were part of the group were really used to being led by the founder, and they weren't set up and weren't confident enough to make decisions on their own accord. And so we actually had to retool the whole business with new people across the whole business over a period of 2 years. So it was, I think 3 people in the end after 2 years out of a group of 30 were still with the organisation, just because we required a growth mindset rather than a maintaining and a stand and deliver type outcome that we did have in place. That was hugely challenging for me to do at the time, and you question whether it's the right thing or not, but it definitely ended up being the brave call that we needed to make to enable us to grow as an organisation.
That's awesome. I mean, it's pretty rare air. Not many people have taken a business from 13 mil to 650. I can imagine a vastly different organisation. And I think that something that people don't talk about is burnout. And, I say rare air, but not many people do it because it's just so incredibly hard to manage the change, manage so many things happening all at once. So you've spoken about experiencing burnout yourself. How did that low point reshape you and how you lead today? And is there any changes or habits that you've adopted ongoing?
Yeah, look, I think that the fact is you don't really get affected by burnout until after the event and after you feel safe. And so in a situation like we were at Swisse, where we're a global business, I was travelling on a plane 3 weeks of every month, and really focused on, delivering what we eventually delivered. And really, if you're competing on a global stage like we were, you need to be prepared to be at a level like an Olympian, say, is training as a 100-metre runner and making similar sacrifices, different to what, say, physically a 100-metre runner does, but mentally making sacrifices that prioritise your work and making sure that you are at a global standard to deliver the extraordinary result we did. And so part of that was running at a pace that was definitely unsustainable. It was something that was sustainable for a period of time, and my body wouldn't have been able to go on like I experienced after we got the result done at Swisse, and after I got the earn-out done 14 months later. I had time to breathe, space to kind of recollect, and my senses to catch up with what I'd just gone through. And I found it really difficult to kind of cope with that, cope with the fact that I didn't have that same level of intensity in my life. And I had a whole lot of reactions and baggage to just picking up my phone and looking at the email, wondering what was going to come at me next to solve. And when that stopped having to happen, the adrenals faded away. And that creates space for you to kind of recover, and the reaction and the consequence of that recovery meant that, I did struggle with thinking clearly, speaking freely in front of large groups of people for a period of time, until I kind of accepted that I needed to go through understanding exactly what drives me as an individual, exactly what triggers me, where my baggage comes from for driving extraordinary success, what is the kind of cause and effect of that, and coming to terms with it and understanding that we're all in some way, shape, form, the sum of who we are as a result of our experiences. And some of those experiences, well, the majority of the experiences in my case have been extraordinarily great and very lucky, but some of those experiences also are unusual to me and have been things that I've had to carry and deal with and talk about. And as a result of getting support from my extraordinary meditation coach, I've managed to get back on top of that and make sure I keep doing the things that help me remain balanced and in sharp form to deal with whatever life brings me, but also understanding what my triggers are and not getting too caught up in the concern around the triggering and why that's happening. And that was causing a heap of stress as a result of, hang on, what's going on here? Why do I feel like this? And hence, the clarity of mindset starts to get questioned to understand exactly what was happening there. But yeah, therapy is really a good thing.
Podcast listeners may not be surprised to hear me respond to that with this question or this topic. There's a book called Good Energy you may have heard of by a lady called Casey Means, and you just spoke about therapy. It speaks about metabolism and the importance of having a good and healthy metabolism and what are all of the factors that go in there, from diet to pollution to everything. But one of the things that really struck with me, to your point, is that it's kind of binary. People need to undergo therapy to disentangle all the stuff that's happened with them so that they can live in a good and healthy way. And so I'm certainly a big advocate for that. But burnout is something that I don't think entrepreneurs, as our primary listeners, should be ignoring. I think you've got to really pay attention to the signs and the signals, and it can really hit you hard. And
I think it was emphasised by I wear occasionally a continuous glucose monitor, and I eat a very healthy diet, and the only thing I really find that triggers my glucose to increase to a level that could be seen as pre-diabetics for short periods of time is stress, and so it's remarkable. And even wearing my Aura ring here and looking at the stress patterns of when I am stressed, it's generally when I'm taking on something related to the business world and working through stuff that I get a stress kick, and I look at it and go, okay, that's okay, but as long as it's not staying peaked beyond that moment of having to deal with a situation, and again, just reinforcing everything that you talk about.
I'm really interested in your take on purpose, profit, passion in your book, How to Build a $1 Billion Business. You talk about the importance of this, and I guess maybe not pursuing profit for its own sake, but really thinking more holistically about it and how to engage the people. Can you share perhaps a moment through your career where living that philosophy, purpose, profit, passion, directly shaped the outcome?
Yeah, I think that it's a healthy tension to be talking about those P's and reinforcing that, to be driven, we need to have purpose in what we do. We need to love what we do, and that's reinforced by passion. We need to feel that we are very comfortable thinking about what we do most of our waking hours. It should drive you nuts how you're trying to problem solve or challenge solve, which is the way we like to refer to things at Swisse. Rather than calling out problems, we call out challenges. And then this concept which I kind of like to speak about now quite regularly of work-life balance is kind of a fallacy. It's unachievable, and the world's getting more and more challenging to enable you to achieve it. So make sure you're doing what you love. It's our Chinese partners actually who bought our business taught me this, is work-life integration. And really you should feel integrated with your work, and it shouldn't feel like that if you are interrupted, which you ultimately will be re-interrupted in your personal life by your work, by an email and so forth, because you'll want to think about it, or by a challenge that you'll take home and want to talk about with your family for insight, or friends outside of your workplace. So unless you lean into that and accept that that's what it's about, you're going to be on this endless path of how do I get work-life balance, and it'll create more stress than you're actually looking to seek through creating balance. So accepting and understanding that what you do you must be passionate about, it must fulfill purpose in your life, and you want to bounce conversations or issues that you may be facing around people in your workplace, but also around you in general. And this should happen naturally, and it shouldn't be jarring then for you to have to switch personalities as you go into a workplace scenario, and then you're trying to be your authentic self all of the time. Well, you're not really being that authentic if you're not that same person who you are outside of work, in work. And these are the basics for an entrepreneur, and it's not for everyone, but for people that are leading businesses and wanting them to grow rapidly and so forth. I think this is a lifestyle you have to accept.
So if you can tell us about the book, How to Build a $1 Billion Business. Why'd you write it? And what are the takeaways that a reader could anticipate?
Yeah, so I think that things like the kind of honest summation of what it takes to build a business and the challenges. Like, this is not I do provide a whole lot of hacks and a whole lot of insight on how you get to a place faster. And we do have a whole lot of mechanisms that we share in what were the fundamentals that created success, which I continue to use today in all of our businesses. But, ultimately, as the title says, if you get all of these kind of the passion and the purpose side right, the profits do follow, because you start to think about this thing in a way that's kind of, how do you reinvent the organisation, and how do you really disrupt a category that might be not growing like the supplement category was when I first joined Swisse, and how do you kind of take metrics from other businesses and bring the collision of another industry into a new industry and create real disruption by reinventing the way you excite people, customers, to try your product.
That's really interesting, and it's a good segue into Light Warrior. This is the investment firm. So before we get to Light Warrior, I'm just personally curious. You've undertaken the exit, then what? Like, did you just go and just sit on the beach to slow down for a few weeks?
Well, I called my wife, and she makes an extraordinary chicken soup, and I just signed the deal. I said, can we just have chicken soup tonight? And we did open a bottle of nice wine, and I was spent, and I needed time to kind of just recoup and work out what I wanted to do next. And part of that too was obviously a whole lot of work on myself personally to get myself ready for that next stage. But it became clear to me that, I'm still a young man. It's even 10 years since Swisse. I'm still not 50. And so, I do love operating and running businesses, but I don't think I could be a CEO again. That level of commitment I'd been through and really driven 20 years of my career to get to that point. And so I needed to kind of take what I'd learned, and also, we're very proud of the sale and finding the right partner. The right partner was a Chinese business. They were listed in Hong Kong. We'd become the biggest natural supplements brand in China. And so for a foreign business to be that in any category or industry in China, it is quite difficult, and particularly in any other country as well, without local support, customs and so forth, that comes with understanding a country's culture and governance and so forth. And so it became clear we needed to sell the business. What was really important was the culture, and culture is what we did extraordinarily well and what other organisations couldn't copy about us. They could copy our marketing, they could copy our products, they could copy our branding to some extent, but no one could understand the coding of our culture and why people were driven like they were. And as a result of that, our productivity compared to, say, a Blackmores, we would spend 7% of our revenue on salaries where they spent 20%. We did pay in the top 25 percentile, so we were just more effective in how we went about doing what we did. So finding an organisation that was culture driven, we actually got a higher offer from a business that didn't put culture first, and the company that bought us had won culture awards in China. Yeah, it's different to Australia and what employer of choices seek to deliver, but it did hold us in great stead for that earnout, and that earnout became almost as valuable, the 30% shares that I had left in it, as the 70% shares that I'd sold. So it held us in great stead. And Swisse to this day still is an employer of choice and has won that accolade every year since we'd sold the business as well, even though we won it a number of times beforehand. So it carried on, and that is why it's now $1 billion in revenue business. So culture was key, and then selling our business to a Chinese organisation is making sure that we give something back to Australia, and this notion of giving back goes back to my feelings of what we can do as business leaders to ensure that our existence of living here in this great place in Australia continues, and that can only continue by providing businesses that are culture focused and are great places for people to work, and people being inspired by the work we do, and then also by the products that we share with them and the experiences that we curate in helping make our society better. So my wife said to me when she first fell in love with me that I'm her light warrior, and hence the name of the organisation. Our foundation is called Light Folk, and we look to provide light to the world, and we're the good warriors doing so and providing for the good folk in our foundation. So yeah, There's the summation.
Beautiful. What a touching human story. So clearly, as you move into now the next phase of life, if you like, you have culture and values and purpose and passion as a very big part of the next phase, the investment phase. Tell us how that's shaped your investment philosophy, what you're looking for in investments and what you're not looking for. Maybe just tell us a little bit about that if you can.
Yeah, so I think that what became clear was we did try a whole gamut of different industries and went, okay, can we apply these same principles that I've kind of learnt from health to a whole raft of industries? And that actually created more stress than I'd ever been through in the past as a CEO. I ended up being in 10 different boards across various different industries with large amounts of people where, again, I didn't know the people like I'd started not to know people at Swisse where it got so large. It became clear that I was not going to be that global CEO. I like to know the people I work with intimately and want to be there for each other. And so suddenly in this scenario where we had minority shareholdings where I thought we wouldn't be as involved and I could just support as a board member. But what I deeply love is operating a business and having that team-like environment that comes with operating an organisation and supporting a great executive team. And so what we did is we just focused on, which my business partner at the time came from Goldman Sachs, on banking and how we would create an impact lens to banking. And so we bought a whole lot of funds management businesses to understand that. And then we created an impact fund, which we saw as a big gap in the market that was focused on disability housing, affordable housing, solar. And it has now become the largest impact fund in Australia and does a lot of amazing work. And then the other half was wellness and me focusing on wellness, but also on all things up and down the supply chain. So I say in terms of, usually you think of manufacturing, which, we do look at raw materials and kind of offerings and services in that area. But the other side of that is advertising and connecting with the general public and how you bring brands to life. And so we've created a number of agencies. One of those was with Chemist Warehouse and creating their agency, which we recently rolled up into the listing. And so that's been very successful to us. And we brought a whole lot of other brands and businesses into that stratosphere and the company's called Stratosphere. And that created an amazing advertising vehicle for Chemist Warehouse, but a whole lot of other brands that have benefited as a result of the way we rethink the way we buy advertising through an arts and culture agency that is all about exactly that. Musicals, great experiences, which I see as the kind of next step in what we've created at Wonderlust and what we will support Loco Love to in the future, which is an amazing chocolate business, a healthy chocolate business that we've invested in. And so those are really exciting organisations that we're bringing to life, not through just products, but through experience with the brand. And we've got Jane Fonda coming out with Wonderlust, and we've got a massive biohacking conference that we're doing with all these luminaries of doctors, scientists, and so forth in the biohacking space that we're bringing out in October. And so that becomes the brand experience. People pay to go along to that experience, so it needs to be incredibly experienced, but the brand evangelism that you create as a result of that experience and the content that comes with that has enabled us to kind of change the game and evolve from what it was like at Swisse, where you'd pick an ambassador and advertise with that ambassador on that TV show that everyone was watching at the time with no distraction of a device, to now creating our own events where people go deep and they get involved with our brand, but also walk away with an incredibly entertaining, life-inspiring experience.
In preparing for this interview, one of the things that really I really respected and appreciated beyond the significance of the numbers and the impact was a B Corporation. And so could you, first of all, just explain what is a B Corporation for the listeners, A, and then B, what are some challenges that you've faced on the path to certification? Because as I understand it, and I've worked with a few companies that are B Corps, it's not easy at all. And has it changed the way that you operate subsequently?
Yeah, I think that the thing for us, we have always thought of ourselves as a B Corp first before we even applied as a B Corp. The notion of B Corp is creating shared value in your business, and that's shared value not only for shareholders, but it's the planet, it's the employees, it's the team, it's everyone that your suppliers, it's everyone that you work with, and that's always been our value set since our time at Swisse, and even my time as a manager at Village. You've got to be a good person and do the right thing beyond just focus on profit. And so, for instance, a decision like using glass containers versus plastic, which might cost us 75% less, is an easy decision for us to choose that path, because it's a much better decision for the planet to choose glass. And so we want to attract consumers and customers that appreciate that. And so those things need to be natural for you to really survive as a B Corp. Otherwise, yes, it does become particularly hard to make those changes and to reposition your brand as something that's kind of thinking about more things than just profit.
Yeah, and if anyone is interested, I would encourage them to search on the web B Corporation. It's a really soulful way to set guidelines around your business. Let's move on to the Columbaris collapse, the restaurant group. You were, a public investor in that, and you've spoken publicly about it. What lesson did you learn through that journey about managing partnerships from a risk perspective and just overall?
Yeah, I think you learn most from failure. So I'm incredibly proud of what we did at Mate Group and what we tried to do. I think we were in a challenging circumstance where George was a 10% shareholder of that business, and we talked and got to know each other through his time as an ambassador at Swisse, and I just loved what he did with the customer experience that his restaurants created. And quite frankly, he's one of Australia's best chefs, if not one of the world's best chefs. He's won French cooking award that no other Australian chef has won, which is a global accolade. And he's so respected by chefs from around the world, and hence why, he's able to do what he did. And so we bought into the business behind George, not being able to do due diligence, because if we'd done that, the price would have been extraordinarily higher, and ultimately it was probably a fair price that we got, probably a little bit more expensive. As a week into it, we started our diligence and we found that people weren't being paid correctly. We looked to remedy that immediately. It ended up costing us tens of millions of dollars to do so over a long period of time, because all of these 1,000 odd people that hadn't been paid correctly had to be contacted, and took us time to do that. And we self-declared, self-reported, and the story really wasn't that. The story became that we hadn't paid people correctly, and that had somehow been done on purpose, which wasn't the case, because as many people were overpaid as underpaid, but that wasn't reported. And so it meant that the brand was under a massive pressure to try and explain how we'd solved the situation, and we did everything we could to clearly put statements out there of exactly the facts, and some media outlets reported that, but the majority, the story had gone already, and the story was that George had done the wrong thing, and really he's a chef and had accountants that owned the business with him. And I will say that the laws, which has now been proven by every big business in this country, incredibly demanding of organisations, particularly small ones. You've got 60 different ways you can pay someone to work in a restaurant. Now, in most executive roles, you just pay them a salary and they get their monthly payment, and if it's off, the person knows it's off, and it's fixed immediately, because everyone knows what they should be getting paid. Now, because of these 60 different ways of people getting paid, there's complete confusion. No one knows what they should be paid, and they can't check what they're being paid. And so the real challenge is that there should be a system in place that enables people to check their pay week to week as they're paid against the hours and their qualifications, and it should be standardised. Or like in New Zealand or the UK, they just have one set of hourly rates rather than overtimes and different payments for different things, whether you can pour a glass of wine or pick up a glass of wine. This has got a little bit ridiculously crazy, and it's confused the likes of Woolworths, it's confused the likes of Wesfarmers, it's confused the likes of the ABC, the Australian government, and universities. That's just to name name a few, in getting paid right. So we are vindicated by the confusion that still remains out there and the ridiculous bureaucracy there is in paying casual team members. And that is only getting more complicated, unfortunately, with more bureaucracy. So hopefully one day sanity will prevail and we can have a clear payment system that doesn't put those workers that are at most risk in being paid incorrectly.
I think you raise such an important point, because at the barbecue with the average person, people hear this person ripped someone off or didn't pay someone else. But the underlying pressure is that most people want to do the right thing, number one. And number two, most people are overwhelmed by the complexity of employment law and want to comply, but it's just so hard to. So I guess I thank you for shouting that out.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask about wellness. Suspect that you have been on a lifelong journey of wellness, and by the sounds of it, have continued to get deeper into this space with some of the things that you've said through our conversation. How does wellness relate to your everyday? How does wellness impact your everyday, and how does it impact the way that you have energy, I guess, as a business person?
Yeah, I think that the most important asset we all share is our health. And so doing everything we can to maintain and get the best out of our health should be a priority for all of us. And it always shocks me when people are surprised when they have to, invest in their health and they say, oh, that's expensive. I kind of smile and go, what if you crashed your car and you had to get it fixed? Or what if you didn't, if you had to get insurance for your car? You might say, it's expensive, but you pay it and you get on with it. Or you need to service your car, you pay for it, you get on with it. Or you put petrol into it. You choose a petrol that's suitable for your car and you make sure it's upkept. And this is a piece of machinery that we utilise. So our most important piece of machinery is our brain. And so the food we feed our gut fuels everything. And being aware of the nutrition we choose alongside the how we exercise our bodies and get the most out of our ability to think, and doing things like meditation, where that's not expensive, but making that choice to look after our brain, like we I always ask the question, do people brush their teeth every day, and do people have a shower every day? And the room puts up their hand, and then I ask them if they're meditating, and it started to, a lot more people are putting up their hand. But our most important piece of machinery is our brain, and what time are we taking out to look after our brain, to make sure it's in as optimal state and as present as it possibly can be to deal with the challenges that we face minute by minute.
Yeah, you only get one body. You've got to look after it, is my quick reaction. Equally, I heard Scott Galloway say recently the single largest correlation between Fortune 500 CEOs isn't the school they went to, it isn't where they grew up, it isn't their gender, it's the fact that they go to the gym or they exercise 5 times a week. So we've got to look after our body.
100%. And, choosing those things that are in our circle of influence to, control the crazy that's going to be out there, the unexpected. So optimizing our health, making the choice to exercise, making the choice to do the right thing by our bodies empowers us and just makes one less uncontrollable, a little bit more controllable as a result of that. So, yeah, 100%.
Thank you. The book that I'm writing at the moment is entitled Bigger Isn't Better, Better is Better. What would you describe, or what do you think that a better business looks like for you?
Yeah, I think that something that you are inspired by, something that you enjoy working in and connecting with your people, what the organisation stands for. And I do really like this notion of looking at how you can integrate community needs into the purpose of your business. That can be either through what the product does and enables and helps people achieve as a result of experiencing it, but also it can be how it can get involved with community organisations, local organisations, and help solve some of those challenges, and also then be inspired by those community leaders in creating a kind of a better way of going about life and integrating business into life through community outcomes. So yeah, making the choice to make time for, every event that we do. For instance, at Wonderlust has a community partner, and we bring to life their story, and that creates some of the most inspiring content up on stage. So yeah, how you can bring that in to what you do, your values, and how you can create a more fulfilling organisation rather than just a business that's focused on making as much money as it can.
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. What is a book that you would recommend for our audience?
I really love The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. It's an incredible story about an individual who created one of the biggest building businesses in the US, and then he went on to create, I won't mention the name of the building business because it's not globally known, but he then went on to create WebMD after that. And the whole notion of that is he's a meditator, deeply spiritual, and he surrendered to whatever came to him through his intuition rather than being overly intellectual about why he would do things. He would believe that the universe would provide the answers, and he leans into that. And it's an incredible journey of an entrepreneur who just follows his intuition, his gut, and yeah, uses some intellect to reinforce whether things are the right thing or wrong thing to do. But the majority of it, if there was a continual reinforcement or pattern of something that presented in his life, lean into it. And that was happening because of the surroundings, the relationships he'd created around himself, which we do whether we're aware of it or unaware of it. And it creates opportunities, and we've got to see those opportunities around us and integrate what we're really good at into those and create like that. And I think it's something that we kind of are getting to know in our kind of later stages now of what business stands for, and getting more in tune with and the importance of it. But this book beautifully summarizes it.
Lovely. We'll put that in the show notes, The Surrender Experiment, Michael Singer. How can people learn more about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, I think that there's a whole lot of great conversations like we've had today that I love doing, and thank you for giving me time to kind of talk like we are and share like we get the opportunity to do in this kind of longer format like we are today. Our book, I'm incredibly proud of that. I didn't think I'd ever write a book. I got fired by my first publisher after 8 years of trying to write the book. It was 160,000 words of drivel. I'm forever thankful to Bernadette, my co-writer, who reached out to me through LinkedIn and helped me create a very entertaining book and find a new publisher that's far more readable, of 80,000 words, and has some great outtakes in kind of what might help other people be successful like we have. And yeah, please reach out to me on LinkedIn if you've got any questions and want to know more.
Lovely. And what haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
I feel very good about this conversation. Thank you.
That's wonderful. That's my aim. I set out to start a podcast to have interesting conversations with interesting people, so I feel I've ticked a box. Radek, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom today. Interesting conversations with interesting people. Like, what a journey, and I just love the soulful human approach that you have to the world. And again, thank you for sharing it with our audience.
We're grateful for you to have me on the program, so thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.